Welcome back to Mysterious Goings On. It's me, Alex Greenwood, your host. And you know, there is a wonderful old Burt Bacharach, Hal David song, What the World Needs Now. And it has been on my mind quite a bit the past few months, particularly, though, the past couple of weeks, as we have seen our nation, indeed our planet, riven by a global pandemic, as well as in the United States, some tremendously destructive and actually tremendously revealing views of violence, racism, and issues with law enforcement in this country. And so I frequently find myself just thinking, you know, what the world needs now is love. And when I was thinking about that, I thought, I need to speak with and introduce you to people, you two listeners, all, or maybe all three of you, to a person who has been not only a friend, but a healing force in my life at times. He's been someone who has a magnificent history as a minister, as a writer, as a broadcaster, as a social advocate. But more than that, he is indeed somebody I think you're going to enjoy meeting. He's Robert Lee Hill, and he is a nonfiction writer, poet, and community consultant for nonprofit organizations focusing on social justice issues, including quality education for all students in the Kansas City public schools, empowering citizens through voter registration, and quality health care for all. He has written or edited 9 previous books, including The Color of Sabbath, Hard to Tell, Life's Too Short for Anything But Love, and the book we're going to talk a little bit more about today, All You Need Is More Love, a Caroline Street Press title. Robert Lee Hill, welcome to Mysterious Goings On.
Hey, Alex. Yeah, it's really strange to hear you call me by all 3 names.
I don't think I've ever done that, have I?
I don't think you have.
You know, you've always been Dr. Hill to me, and then we became more friendly, and now you keep telling me it's just Bob, Alex.
That's right. That's right.
Bob, you heard the lead in, and you know, and you're living what's going on. And the reason I really did want to speak with you, I wanted to speak with you for a long time on the show, but it just seems the timing right now. Is it just too much to ask that people still believe in love?
No. It's good to remind them that love is absolutely at the core of what it means to be human. And that loving each other more, especially in times that are dire and down and very dour, really is a time for to make a difference with their love. I will tell you, this is a pretty big moment in our journey as the human race and our journey as the country called the United States right now. And I just want to applaud my newfound millennial and Gen Z friends who, and I don't mean Gen Z, I don't mean that's a play on frenzy. No, I mean Generation Z.
Right.
These, the Gen Z friends and the millennial friends who are leading the way in bringing to light the need for transformation and change and reform with regard to racial justice in this country. But it also looks like it's spreading around the world as well. So I've been trying to think historically, what has happened? Is this a combination of the television cameras that were focused on Birmingham when the hoses were let loose on the protesting students, or Emmett Till's dastardly lynching-like murder? Or was it like the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing? What has happened to galvanize the attention and energy of our whole country, where 70 to 80% of us believe that racial discrimination, racism, and racial disparities are to be attended to now? I just commend the youth of our country. This is not to excuse any violence, and as you well know, Community Christian Church, where I was pastor for 30 plus years, before going into semi-retirement and being named Minister Emeritus. It's been tagged, so to speak, with some horrific words and outlashings. By the way, I don't think the majority of the protesters did that. I think that there were some outliers. I would like to understand if some white nationalists posing as left-wingers it did, in fact, maybe do some of the violence around the country, maybe even in Kansas City. But it has been hugely peaceful. It's been magnificently quiet in a way. There was even a silent protest yesterday where not a word was said nor a word was yelled. It was just silent presence. So I'm commending the protesters on moving us forward.
How have you found the really beyond Mr. Floyd's horrific end? But I know you've been watching, obviously, since Community Christian is right there on the plaza where we've had Kansas City's demonstrations.
Right.
I'm certain you've seen the video of the young man who was doing nothing more than talking to the police, who then, after hearing a bit, walked right up to him, I believe pepper sprayed him and put him down and handcuffed him. Did you see that video?
I saw it out of the corner of my eye. Yeah, I've seen snatches of it. That person will be disciplined. That person doesn't deserve to wear the blue of the KCPD. And I think that Mayor Lucas, who's done a fantastic job of adjudicating and maneuvering through these straits, plus the police chief will deal with that in the proper way. I expect them to.
Bob, if we can just let's harken back a little bit to your youth, about 10 years ago. And
yeah, thank you.
But you know, one of the first things when I first moved here, you of course, my great mentor, the late Reverend Jeff Hamilton, he was a community. He was from here, and he basically introduced me to you.
Right.
Long distance. And you took me to lunch at Gates Barbecue. You probably don't remember this.
I don't remember that. Really?
You were wearing your black leather coat. Yeah, I remember it. And
really?
Yes, and I'd never been to Gates. So
oh, really? What a pleasure for you.
It was total pleasure. And I remember, by the way, somebody kind of buttonholed you to the side and said, "Hello, Dr. Hill, Reverend Hill," and talked to you. And I was, just watching. And I thought, I'm in the presence of a bit of a rock star here. But no, I'm not flattering. It's completely what happened. So then we sat down. But the point is, you told me about your life. And you told me that back in the days in Vietnam, you were a conscientious objector. You chose not to go. You have deep political, religious, spiritual reasons not to. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes. It's important to say what I did believe I could and should and would do. It was that I could not bear, at that time, I could not bear a weapon, and I could not kill somebody. I didn't mind serving my country, and I did because I was drafted. At the age of 19, kind of yanked out of TCU and was plopped down through some very, very fortuitous and blessed coincidences, which we don't have time enough for your show. I was plopped down in South Central LA and worked there as a youth and family worker for 2 years. And that confirmed a sense of what we call in the religion world or church world, a sense of call to be a pastor, to be a preacher, to engage in that priestly and prophetic action that ministers do. So I'd grown up in Brownsville, Texas, and my mother had taken me she was a public school nurse. She had taken me with her to do inoculations on the levees of the Rio Grande River, where certain of the students lived. They lived in shacks, incredible poverty. Where we lived, Cameron County was the poorest county in all of Texas, one of the poorest counties in the United States. I did not know that we were poor until about 25 years after I ever left there. I went back and said, oh my God, we had nothing, and looked at our house, and I figured out something, Alex. There's a machine that somebody has, and they go around and shrink the house that you grew up in. But when you go back there, it is not as grand and as glorious as you remember. Anyway, so at 2465 Hip Avenue, we were the only Anglo family in a completely Latino neighborhood, and in a city of about 75 to 80,000 people then, that was 95 to 97% Latino. It is the same to this day. So anyway, that was a blessing for me. I knew Spanish cuss words before I knew English cuss words. It was a great place to grow up. I got good education there. I got a good imprint from my mother that while we might not have the same income level, those kids were going to have the same inoculations that I had. Well, in South Central LA, at the age of 19, I ended up in the poorest zip code in California. So, I kind of felt right at home, I guess, and lived across the street from All People's Community Center and was a youth and family worker there for 2 years. It was a formative time. I would eventually be ordained at the church there, All People's Christian Church. Maybe I did something to it because I think they had to tear it down after the ordination. So they built a brand new edifice and a brand new community center for the neighborhood. It is still one of the most necessary, most thriving, most vibrant communities in all of Los Angeles, and particularly in the impoverished areas of Los Angeles.
Well, the reason I brought that up, your beginnings and your humble beginnings that at the time you had no idea were humble, was it clearly did, as you said, but it clearly did form your worldview, didn't it? I mean,
oh yeah.
So I guess what I'm asking, and there's a lot in between, obviously, of that and there, but I guess where I was going with this was how much of that you grew up with that formed you do you see now? Are you seeing parallels with these? Because you started off talking about these millennials and these Gen Z kids who are found, or maybe founding their calling to stand up to racism and to stand up to violence. Right. Are you seeing a parallel here?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's kind of like baby boomers, of which I'm one. We can be incredibly arrogant. We can be incredibly presumptuous. Now, we were at one time the biggest, we were the pig and the python, as sociologists called us. We were the biggest generation that had come along in a long time. And then we thought we were going to change everything. We thought we were going to make everything right. We did some things right. We did many things not so good, not so well, not so laudatory. And we did many things where we did nothing. We did it by doing nothing. That'd make a good poem. To see a new generation kind of assuages any kind of worry that good causes won't be taken up. Worries that things and ideals that we really believed in, all of us believe in, and I think all Americans believe in, are not going to be left at the side of the road. They will not be orphaned. They will be engaged. They will be embraced. They are being engaged. They are being embraced. And in particular, racism.
Yeah.
This is our nation's, as it's called by many, our original sin, our fall from grace as a country. From the very beginning, and even institutionalized in our very Constitution before we could amend it. When Black folk were 3/5 of a human being, they weren't really fully human. Yeah. But anyway, we've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go. And now it looks like there's a lot more people who are going to go on that way.
Yeah, it's. I remember when President Obama was elected. I think there was a feeling, completely wrong, but a feeling that, well, there you go, right? Mm-hmm. You know, I think there were some very self-satisfied people who said, well, look at it there. We have an African-American president. All is now right. There is no problem here. But it seems to me that actually was the Firestarter that we are seeing now. I mean, that was to me, what I'm observing was the tinder that it set up this massive forest fire we're going through now. I think it set off some people in a some bad people in a horrific way. Is that fair, do you think, or what do you think about that?
I think that we won't know until we're very near our last breaths. It will be historians that really tell us what has happened. But I could guess, and I would hazard this projection or this guess, that the country as a whole was not ready for the election of Barack Obama. We said so in our votes, at least a majority, but when it came to really leading a racist underbelly of our country that was much more significant than we had ever imagined, reared its head and pushed back. And it was a response, a backlash, if you will. Some have called it a white lash. That's one way of putting it. But I think we're seeing a kind of not balancing, but a redress of the lesser demons of our nature to parallel the better angels of our nature, the lesser demons that were let loose by an endorsement of white nationalism, by an acceptance of resistance by the birtherism that President Obama was accused of abiding in and benefiting from, meaning the birtherism was the critique that he really wasn't a citizen.
Right.
Some people just couldn't get it in their framework, in their mental, spiritual, emotional framework that a Black man could be their president. That's so sad and so kind of diseased. That is pathetic, but that's where I think obviously a significant portion of people were and are even to this day. But now the pushback has come to the pushback. And we're seeing folks that are saying, no, I believe in equality. I believe in people getting a fair shake. I believe that you should not be knelt down upon with a knee upon your neck when you are already under restraint and cuffed. I believe that that's wrong and that that's murder. And I think that we're seeing our young people, to quote a great source, and a little child shall lead them. We're seeing a new generation lead us to really engage that. I have been amazed at how quickening, or the quickening within police forces, within mayors, within a Republican senator just last night, who are embracing the Black Lives Matter moment that has been going on for a while, for at least 6 or 7 years, and they're embracing it now.
The NFL.
And it'll be interesting to see if Colin Kaepernick ever gets another shot at playing.
That guy, he's owed an apology. Let me talk about your time in the ministry, and I want to connect it to this. So 30 years in the ministry, a huge chunk of it being at Community Christian, which was and is a force for good in our community.
You're nice to say.
Well, as an aside, I started my spiritual life in not a great way. It was a different denomination. You may not recall, but I'm from Oklahoma. Think hard.
Yeah, I got you. I think I know that story.
Right. And then I found some places accepting and loving, and that worked for me. But in all of your ministry, surely, occasionally, you must have had to, even from a parishioner, I don't know. I'm just putting this thought to you, who maybe did not care for Black folks.
Oh yeah.
Did you come across that, first of all?
Oh yeah, that happened. I've actually been in ministry, technically speaking, for 42 years, but at Community 30 plus. I was pastor of a kind of a storefront church and working with ex-offenders, well over 75% of whom were African-American in Nashville, Tennessee, in a project called Project Return that, by the way, still exists to this day. Unbelievable. I got to be at the founding of it and the creation of it. So, but on the weekends, I was pastor of a small church. And in our very small congregation, we probably had 25 to 30 people on a Sunday morning. One family had a biracial marriage in it, and the patriarch of the family would not really accept his African American son-in-law. I was pastored to him. I told him what I thought and felt, and thought that he should reconcile with his daughter and his son-in-law, and that one day when they had children, I would pray that he would be much different than in his attitude and in his treatment of his son-in-law. And then the couple had a baby. And this man heard about the baby and saw flesh of his flesh, even though a generation removed. And his wife, the grandmother of this new boy, new young baby coming into the world, was in love with the child. And he saw the child and he embraced the child. And then he embraced his son-in-law. And then I gave him support and encouragement and affirmation for encountering what he might encounter elsewhere once people heard about his grandson. And at a big manufacturing plant where he was a member of the union there and part of the workforce, somebody called his new grandbaby, his new grandson, the N-word. And he stood his ground and he said, "Don't you ever use that word in my presence ever again about my grandson, about my son-in-law, about me, or about anybody else, not in my presence. If you do, you're not my friend anymore. I'm done." So that was pretty transformational. And that was a long time ago. That was 40 years ago. At Community, we even had a member who never attended. I didn't even know who she was, but we called as an associate pastor an African-American woman who turned out to be one of the most spiritual, one of the most caring, loving, compassionate persons we could have ever had in that position. And she was and would remain beloved all up until the time she abandoned us to go get married. And
how dare she?
How dare she? She is now what we call a regional minister, like a bishop in our denomination, and one of the most precious persons I have a relationship with the ministry anywhere. At any rate, the letter came in, person saying something very derogatory and accusing me of a lot of things, and I won't go into the sullied and untoward rhetoric she used. And I just said, well, good. Okay, good. We don't have to deal with that anymore. Send her "We're sorry you're leaving. Thank you very much. We wish you well on your journey. And we don't have to deal with that obstacle anymore. Thank you." I wasn't that blunt with her. I was very courteous in the letter, but there are some loss. There are some costs when you take a stand or when you do certain things that show what you really believe.
To me, the parallels are interesting here because the previous story, until the man saw the baby, the grandbaby, right? And it's just like until the world saw what happened to George Floyd, and there was no question what happened to him. He was murdered.
Exactly.
And then, so there's that. That's something I think is so important, is that I think people have to see with their own eyes. And now that the entire world is basically a giant security camera because everybody's got one, which, as an aside, it astonishes me, by the way, that some police, knowing full well they're being filmed, are still doing incredibly horrific things to people. It's just,
they haven't come into the 21st century with regard to tech savviness, or
anything else. But my point, and then about the last thing you said, though, this is something this was a thing about the ministry and about spiritual leaders like yourself, that it took me a long time to understand is, and this is not the first time I've kind of heard you say that or observed you being, I love everybody, but I'm being candid and blunt and paraphrasing. I love everybody, but I don't have to put up with all your BS all the time. You know what I'm saying?
You have to have some thick skin.
Yeah.
And you have to go beyond wanting or needing everybody to like you. That's not the job of a pastor. That's not the job of a person who's going to be a community advocate. If you have to have everybody like you, ministry is the wrong profession to go into. I would say that about writing. If you have to have everybody like every jot and tittle you put down on a piece of paper, well, then number one, you're going to hate your editor. You're going to hate your proofreader. You're not going to be open to healthy, wonderful criticism that will make you a better writer.
Right.
And the criticism helps, even when you disagree with it, it helps a pastor, a minister, a preacher become more honed. It helps you, as we say, sharpen your axe.
Right.
It helps us all become better at what we're doing. So critique is really important. And if you can't receive it and then say, no, you really don't know me, and your argument is specious, or it's really too emotional to even engage in a rational way, or you're abiding in bigotry in your response to what I've done. If you can't do that, then you really shouldn't be in the public square, and you shouldn't be dealing with very many people.
That is so great. And that transitions right into the writing. All you need is more love, and 101 more musings, essays, and sundry pieces came out late last year, right around Christmas, right before. Yep. With Caroline Street Press. And there's a foreword by a U.S. representative, and speaking of the public square, U.S. Congressperson or Congressman Emanuel Cleaver II, also a minister, does the foreword. It has these wonderful blurbs in it, and I'm pretty intimate with this book. I've read it technically 3 times, and and I'm going to tell you, listeners, it's a treat. And one reason we got Bob on at this time, by the way, it's been out in paperback since around Christmas, but it just in May came out as an ebook. Bob wanted to hold off on that whole newfangled ebook thing right away, and he was smart to do so because you did a bit of a book tour around the area, didn't you?
Around the area, and mostly in congregations, and then a little bit on social media. I'm not a tweeter like you are. I don't tweet, but I am on Facebook, and I guess I need to be on Twitter a bit, but. And then I used to have a pretty long listserv for my column at the church.
Right.
And I haven't gone back to that, but I do have a little bit of a website, Rev Hill on WordPress, called View from the Hill. And I post things there that I also post on Facebook. That's been amazing. I haven't sought people out, but a lot of people seem to be following. More and more seem to be increasingly following. And it's just been a delight to get this book off the ground. Caroline Street Press was wonderful with me. Great to have them as a publisher, and the book came out great.
You know what I like about it too, and you even told me this, is like, Alex, this is a great book. You can put it down by the bedside or in your study. You don't have to read it all in one setting.
Yeah.
These are bite-sized pieces, and I love this. And the one I reread recently, you wrote letters to your is it nephews and nieces, or
my nephews, and I'm now nephews and nieces, and great nephews and great nieces. But I have 1 niece and 3 nephews, and I wrote letters during on the run-up to the election, on the eve of the election in 2016, then on the day of the inauguration in 2017 of Donald Trump, and then on July 4th, a year and a half later, in 2018. So coming up on 2 years ago. And all of this was, I wanted them to know where their Uncle Bob stood. You know, we have I've done all their weddings, and trying to do all their baby blessings, but from a distance, it's very difficult. We have to do a little bit of Zooming and remoting. So at any rate, so I wrote a letter to Christopher and Matthew and Nicholas and Lincoln and Catherine, and said I wanted them to know where their Uncle Bob stood in relationship to the presidential election, then with regard to President Trump's inauguration, and then with regard to his presidency. And I was constrained, I felt, by being part of a nonprofit group that was doing voter education, voter motivation, and voter turnout. And if you do that, to maintain your 501c3 status, you have to be nonpartisan. And I didn't want to be, championing any one candidate, but I wanted them to know where I stood and why. And so I wrote those letters. Now they're the longest pieces in the book. Somebody might say, well, I wonder if he preaches like this. And the answer to that probably would be yes. Not as discursive. My paragraphs aren't that long. The sentence is not that complicated in the preaching moment, but they are sermonic in the best sense of that word. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was to take a stand for what I now believe is a very bad choice that our nation made. We made it. It is our choice. It's not, nobody else did it. I'm not blaming anybody. We did this. I didn't vote for Donald Trump, but I would never, ever, it's only the reasons for my not voting for him have been proven again and again and again in subsequent years.
Okay. Do you...
Not to be partisan or anything.
Not at all. Well, here's a question for you. This might be tough for you. Maybe it won't be. If do you believe Donald Trump deserves to be loved?
Oh yes, that's an easy one. Everyone deserves to be loved. Does he deserve respect? No. Does he deserve my vote? No. Does he deserve forbearance with regard to his volatility, his treatment of women, his lack of disassociation from white nationalism? No. Do I need to abide that and say all of those things? Well, he acts like some of them. I have a few friends that are this way. Oh, he's kind of rough around the edges, but I like what he's done for the economy. And I said, have you really looked at the economy and the way it's really affecting you? These are not wealthy people. And if they really were looked at how they benefited or didn't benefit, I think that they would see they didn't benefit, not much. Well, maybe even suffered.
There's a lot of people who, like the president, seem to judge the state of the economy by how well Wall Street's doing it. Well, Wall Street is not Main Street.
Nope.
It's a part. Nope, it's an indicator, of course, but I mean that doesn't mean that people have decent wages.
Yeah, and the fact that we languish in a minimum wage in Missouri that is, I think, 50% under what would be a living wage, and well, for an individual, not for a family. For an individual, and way below the poverty line. So we could slice and dice all of those sociological factors and come up with good justifications for saying that somebody does not to be elected, does not need to be respected. But to get back to your original question, yes, absolutely. Every human being deserves to be loved. The question that we would have for Donald Trump would be, how do I love him in a way that he would even accept? This is not going to happen, but if I was ever invited to pray at a function connected with this White House, I would say, well, you need to see the prayer that I will likely pray, and I would compose one, and it would probably include a healthy dose of asking the president to repent from most of what his agenda has been. And I doubt if I think that they would say that was insulting. I would just say, you deserve to know it before you invite me. I'm not going to be invited. I'm not part of that group of people that adulate and support him. And he's only ever going to have somebody who adulates and supports him in his presence. So,
well, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying, but theoretically and at the heart of every pastor is the call to love. And that's hard. It can be seemingly impossible.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, that's why I answered it so quickly. Oh, of course, yes. He deserves to be loved.
If you can't, I'm fascinated with people like yourself in the ministry because of that capacity. I don't know if that's just innate or you have to learn that. It's tools of the trade or part of the job, or I don't know that. I'm not that well evolved. I don't know if I could love this guy.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to hear it from you.
Well, love doesn't mean approve. Love doesn't mean just endorse. Love means I wish that your best self will be expressed in the world. And that can be applied to anybody.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And that's what I wish, that's what I hope, that's what I need to focus upon. That everybody's best self would be expressed in the world. And so that's why it can be applicable to Donald Trump.
Bob, when you were doing the tour and when you had some people talk to you about this wonderful book, was there a common compliment or thread? If I don't mean to embarrass you, was there something that people said they liked best about it? Was there something different about this book than your previous works?
This book was similar to a book that it followed that was very similar in style and format, which was Life's Too Short for Anything But Love. And they said they wanted more, and so the more came out in All You Need Is More Love. And then I have a third volume that I'm preparing now and hopefully will bring out in the next 12 to 18 months called Love Always. What they liked about it, you've already commented on it, is that it was not something that you had to read in one sitting. That the rhetoric used, the format that structures the book was such that they could read little glimpses of it. I don't know whether that's a confession about the very shortened attention spans that we all have these days, or that this was more not devotional, but meditative, reflective, and they needed that in their lives. They needed that kind of moment to reflect upon. For example, in the new book, I've got a chapter called Big Red, and all it's a rumination about a redbud tree that we had to cut down in our front yard. And it's just, what did that tree see? How did that tree anchor our home for the previous owners before we bought this home? How we love this tree, and what kind of vacancy, what kind of vacuum would be created in our spiritual, emotional, and visual fields with it gone. So they like readers seem to like these short meditative pieces. And, I'm not yet, I don't think I ever will be, a page turner writer like I enjoy. I like books that are mysteries. I love mysteries where you can sit down like your books
Bless your
and
heart.
just turn the pages and see, oh yeah, I want something that just compels me to the next chapter. I love that. And your books are the only critique I would give you of your books is that they're too short. I want it to go on.
You're gonna bless your heart. You'll like the new one I'm working on. It's going to be exceptionally long compared to the rest. But thank you for that, Bob. In the time we have left here, there's so much I could talk to you about this. But I want to talk to you, since we're talking writing now, a little bit here. And by the way, folks, there will be links in the show notes to get books here, and we'll ask Bob at the end again about his website and where you can find him, and we'll put all those links in the show notes, never fear. So here we go, though. Bob, about the writing, before we started rolling, you told me you had no fewer than 5 things in the works. Now, I'm not saying they're all, a lot of them are already pretty well done, more or less, right? The poetry's written, the most of it, that kind of thing,
right?
But you need to put them together for publication. You're going to talk to the folks at Caroline Street perhaps and see that, but you still have a lot of writing you are and have been doing,
right?
And as we discussed briefly before we started, I have spoken and interviewed several writers, especially since the pandemic. I had Douglas Skelton, who is a very acclaimed Scottish mystery writer, by the way, who I highly recommend, Bob. I think you'd like. We talked about his new book, and he has the most delightful Scottish brogue in the interview. But I was talking to him, and he said that he was having a little trouble focusing. And I said the same thing. I'm having trouble focusing. I don't believe in writer's block. I believe you just, you get to it. But I've got another couple of writer friends who've anecdotally said the same thing, that they've had a tough time focusing. But you, my friend, you're just plugging away. What is different about you and your process that we're missing?
Oh, I don't know if you're missing anything. I do think that I'd have two answers if you said, well, what's my general approach to writing? One would be with fear and trembling. To sit down and be so audaciously forward. I don't want to condemn myself. I don't want to say arrogant. It's not arrogance. Presumptuous, audacious presumption that what I have to say can make a difference or needs to be heard or read. But there's no writer that doesn't have a little bit of that in them. They have that, and there's no writer that writes, or very infrequently, once in a century, and Emily Dickinson comes along, and she doesn't have to be, she tried to, but she doesn't have to be published, and she's published and discovered 75 years after she dies. Very few writers are like that. There's a need to get it out, to get the words out, to be read, to have some kind of response, to have an audience. I approach writing that way. And then a second way is, as Annie Lamott cautions and really encourages people to get a ballpoint pen. Always have a ballpoint pen on you, because even if you work with a computer, you take a walk around the block or through the park, you're going to need something to write on your hand, and a pencil won't do. So you have a ballpoint pen so you can write a word of inspiration down before you get back to your desk and can really put it down. And secondly, at your desk, you're going to need a really good chair, because you're going to sit in that chair a lot. So you need a good ballpoint pen and a good chair, and then you do the work. The third thing, and this is kind of a sweet spot for me, writing is an adventure. I understand something best, a social issue, a relationship, a daunting problem, a funny encounter, a family kind of tie, anything, when I can write about it. Perhaps best after I've written about it. And so there is that in me. I have maybe insatiable would be too much, unquenchable would be too much, but a kind of steady yearning, burning to know some things and to know them better. And writing helps me know them better. So that's why. So for example, this season, I've written a couple of poems, and I began writing them on my phone, because it was early in the morning, I was awake, and I had the rhythm in one poem. I write rhythmically, or I had a phrase that caught me and alerted my, kind of like a burr, it caught my attention and wouldn't let go. And I began writing on my phone. I'd never done that before. I always either write by hand, or I'll have a phrase and I'll write it on my computer, but never on my phone. I wrote one of these, the entire poem on the phone. I couldn't believe it. It was done within 25 minutes. Now it took me another about 32 days to edit it to get it right. And I love the editing process. I get that from Raymond Carver. He said he loved the editing process, because you get to go over the words. You get to try out new ways, nuances, edges. You get new ways of trying to see how the words can combine. So I've done some formalized poetry that is unusual for me. And then I'm getting back into some free verse poetry now that will probably be arresting to some people. I've written some a very short quatrain about cancer that probably can't get published. Anyway, the other thing is I confer with others. I only bring to Caroline Street Press the big kahuna, the thing when it's done.
Yeah.
But I have trusted mentors. They're not mentors. They're to use, they're confreres. I mean, they're compadres. They're sojourners along. They're viators. You know, they're the ones that go along with you on your journey. And I'll send them something. So I wrote something about George Floyd and this repeated question lately: what can we do? What can I do? And I was reflecting on this, and I had 7 things that I wanted to talk about, and I whittled it down to a 5-finger exercise. And my buddy Johnny Ray, I sent it off to him. He liked it, but he said, "Well, Bob, it seems like there'd be more than 5. Could you make it into a 10-finger exercise?" I said, "You giddy up. All right." So then I worked on it some more, some word choice, etc., teasing out and where, you know, how something is heard and can it be heard, who was the audience, that kind of thing. And so it's an adventure in which I'm trying to understand something. I'm trying to know something better, or to know it more deeply. And also, just to use the word love, if you ever write a love poem, it's impossible. The experience of love is beyond mere articulation. That's why we have this thing called incarnation, where it's enfleshed. And that's how you know this love with your wife and your child, your daughter. You can talk a blue streak all the day long, but you got to show that love, and you got to be that love for one another. But nonetheless, trying to write about love is a very helpful way to try to understand it and to get better at it. So,
you know, you reminded me of something. I take more and more with the weather. I'd take anywhere from 4 to 5 6-mile hikes a week. And I just need it, one, because we're kind of on lockdown. We rarely go anywhere unless we have to, but I can walk, and I'm blessed in this part of the world I'm in now. There's a nature park a mile and a half away. But I just keep building on another mile, add another mile to walk. It's some exercise, etc. But the other day, you reminded me of this with your phone. I'm on this new book I mentioned, this new mystery. I was not stuck, but maybe a little. And I don't know what it was, Bob, but just the act of one foot in front of the other, the mindlessness of just walking, my mind just did its thing. And then it came to me, and I had to whip out my phone and just type myself a note, because I will forget.
Go.
I will forget, you know?
Oh, yeah. Oh. No one will remember. And either you have a ballpoint pen or you have your phone, and you sit there and you get it right down that moment. One of my mentors in ministry, a man named Fred Craddock, said, you know, write extended notes when you get inspired. Don't go to your journal and see a line there and say, well, I wonder what that meant. Bird on a wire, bird on a wire, bird on a wire. Write down details, even if it seems seemingly gibberish, because it may be, by the way, you're a novelist. You're trying to complete the story narrative line, the character development, the conflict, the resolution, and then some throwaway thing that you may edit out, that may become the gist and the kernel for another book.
You're so right. You're so right. Bob, we're going to wrap up here, but I wanted to ask you just a couple of quick things. And again, folks, well, let me ask you this, Bob. I'm going to say this. I think you can start with All You Need Is More Love, but would you say, is there another of your volumes that you would put ahead of it, or what do you think?
No, I would say start with this one.
Okay.
It's the prettiest covered book that I have. I will tell you that.
I think Jason McIntyre helped put this together.
This is a wonderful cover. And no, I would say this is, maybe it has better editing. give you some tribute. to give my proofreader editor, David, great round of thanks for what he did. And he, I hope that he can edit and proofread all of my works forever. He's great. Any rate, so no, I would say start with All You Need Is More Love. Then I would suggest Life's Too Short for Anything But Love. I don't think you can find, and this is something that I may have to talk to a publisher about reissuing, the book of poems called Hard to Tell. You can hardly even get that on ABE books.
I do have that volume, and it's wonderful. And that's another one that I sincerely, Bob, pull out. I like poetry. I'm not an aficionado, but I can't write it worth a damn, but I enjoy it, and I'll pull that one out and read. But I think that one's great too. But yeah, you've got to reissue some of these. But yeah, and we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that Sonia Schaefer also helped with the cover.
Oh, Sonia Schaefer, helped with the lettering, and she's a great artist herself.
It's really great.
One of the great portraiture artist of in the Midwest.
Yeah, she really is. It's kind of nice, Bob. You got you can pull together a pretty great team. You're like the Patrick Mahomes, I guess, of this.
Way too generous.
So real quickly, what are you, besides your writing, what are you doing? Is there a day job you're doing right now that you care to just mention in general?
Sure. I don't mind mentioning that at all. I work as a consultant directly now with the